So I'm going to call this one Fraud, Criminality and Censorship of Remedies by the Medical Industrial Complex. And just to recap from the last couple that we did, we talked about this push to move more from an energy perception about health towards this physical perception about health. And I think that's really hampering us in relation to our wellness. So there's a big push by all these big institutions to actually have us think of things in a very solid way. We talked about the effects of energy and health, and how that's something that is sorely missing when we're trying to get people healthy. Last week we also talked about the creation of the medical industry, and it has been a creation. So we talked about the Flexidor reports, and we talked about the establishment of peer-reviewed journals. We talked about the establishment of science, and how all this stuff has really been set up just to push what I kind of tend to believe more and more now are more myths than actually things that we can trust in fully. So we're going to break down some more of those myths and some of the things that we have to consider in relation to wellness, okay? We also talked about the placebo effect, and that falls very muchly into an energy way of thinking as opposed to a real physical 3D way of thinking. And that actually is what, as we said last week, can be one of the most important ways to heal absolutely anything. It's the placebo effect. The placebo effect is free, so this doesn't benefit industry. Free things don't benefit industries, okay? Some people have done some really good research, and every single company that you can think about, they're all co-owned. And we can break these down into maybe 2 or 3. We've all heard of companies like BlackRock, Blackstone, Vanguard. Okay, these guys own just about 95% of everything in the world. So the same owners that own your TV companies and your selling companies like your supermarkets, all these kind of things, they own the medical industry. And these guys are also selling us drugs, which invariably are not very good. The drugs are useless. And a lot of times they're actually killing us. So if we think that the whole world is owned by these big, massive entities, I certainly do, and a lot of people do, we've got to challenge just about everything we're told. When you start going down some different rabbit holes, you really realize how much rubbish we're getting told. And a good example is the Egyptian pyramids. Anybody look into that stuff? Okay, so we're told that the Egyptian pyramids are 5,000 years old, and we have this idea of history starting from this point and then distributing out. But there's a few researchers. One guy's a guy called Graham Hancock. Anybody heard of him? Yes. Yep, fantastic researcher who categorically proves now that the pyramids are more than 12,000 years old. Okay, and there's lots of different reasons for that. So then we got to question some of the stuff we see in the pyramids, which look like they show that there is ancient technology. Okay. How the hell did those big rocks get there? Some guys with spoons and you know, bloody stone implements and bronze implements cut these massive stones because they were bored. They had enough food. How did they put them? Why did they put them there? Okay, so there's a fair bit of evidence that we have got these ancient technologies. So did these technologies disappear? Probably not. Would it benefit the oil industry for us to have free energy? Probably not. Would it benefit any of the research and medical industries for us to be healthy? Probably not. So we have to question absolutely everything, okay? Even, you know, you might want to make some notes, but a fellow called Stanley Meyer, a guy who invented a hydrogen engine. He mysteriously died afterwards in about the 70s, I think it was. You've got things like telepathy. Anybody heard of a guy called Rupert Sheldrake? It's another good, interesting name. Look at some of his stuff. Talks about a thing called morphic resonance. He's done some incredible experiments around pets and dogs. So these dogs might identify when people can come home from work, when their owners come home from work. So this guy set up these cameras in the house, and they tried to trick these dogs. They tried to put the wrong owner in the right car with the wrong owner, change the times, and the dogs, 95% of the time, I can't remember exactly what it was, but nearly every time these dogs knew when their owner was coming home. Okay? He talks about Roger Bannister and the 4-minute mile. All of a sudden, the 4-minute mile collapsed anywhere. You got this phenomena of rats in these mazes. Once one rat in a maze breaks this incredibly complex system, another rat in a totally different country does the same thing. So we've got these bizarre things that happen that science will tell you that it's rubbish. It doesn't exist. Okay, so we got to have question marks on absolutely everything. We can look at things like hallucinogenics, like mushrooms, things like ayahuasca. Are people maybe going into these other dimensions? If we can access these different types of vibrations or these different types of knowledge, is that good for people who want to keep us as dumb consumers? It's not very good for them. So we question absolutely everything. One of the biggest things that I've stumbled across in the last 5 years is the whole paradigm that the medical system is based on, which is this idea of contagion. So who's heard of a thing called terrain theory? Yep, a couple of people here have. Okay, anybody familiar with it or kind of have an idea about how it works? Okay, I'll go into it. So essentially the whole idea of where medicine came from, it really started in about the late 1800s to the early 1900s. And this is also the same kind of time that we talked about last time when we had the Flexner report and its divergence towards polluting us with chemicals to try and fix stuff, which you can't. Okay, so in around the late 1800s, we had a guy called Claude Bernard, and he came along and he used to demonstrate drinking cholera water with his buddies. 5 or 6 of them, they go to Africa. Some of them would get incredibly sick. Himself and 2 or 3 others wouldn't get sick. So this guy's saying, hang on a second, I'm disputing the idea that there's this little nasty bug there, because if there was, we'd all get sick. Okay, so then on the back of his work, you had a fellow called Beauchamp. Okay, and he was Pasteur's kind of arch rival, his nemesis. Okay, there's a really interesting book out, something like Pasteur versus Beauchamp. Okay, it talks about germ theory and terrain theory. And these guys were fairly important because one of the industries at the time, they were both from France, was the wine industry. Okay, so these guys had to do a lot of work with trying to keep the wine industry intact, because you had all these kind of things growing on vines, which would affect the industry. So Beauchamp put a lot of stuff together about possibilities about what was happening to the vines. And it was interesting, but Mr. Pasteur actually stole and plagiarized a lot of his work. One of his, I think his grandnephews or somebody from his family after he died didn't like him. Apparently he was a very nasty guy. He released his diaries, and in his diaries and his letters, you can see that he would poison his sheep with anthrax to prove his germ theories. He used to do this. This guy used to plagiarize, and he was actually fraudulent with his work. And our whole work around the medical industry is based off what this guy thought. Okay? So conventionally, and we don't even stop for a second to think about this, because we're told from when we're babies that things are dirty. We can't touch this, we can't put this in our mouth, we'll die if we get this, we'll die if we get that. We've got AIDS, we've got all these things trying to fight us, trying to kill us, trying to find us, trying to take us out. And we just believe it. But if we stop and think, maybe we shouldn't. Okay? Maybe we shouldn't. So the idea is there's these little bugs around. Have anybody heard of a thing called the hygiene hypothesis? The hygiene hypothesis? Okay? Something that's been around since the 90s. Kids playing in the dirt don't get sick. And kids being kept clean are getting sick. We have evidence of kids playing with dogs and pets. They don't get sick as sick as kids who are kept sterile and clean. So why is that? There's a few little chinks there that don't make sense. Okay? And the germ theory kind of contagion, the contagion theory would tell us that we build up our immune system by getting exposure to these things. What would happen if these little bugs and things floating around didn't cause disease? So there's an analogy, and the analogy is a little bit like the rubbish tip and the flies. Has anybody heard this one? So I'm an alien, I come down to Earth, and I'm doing my reports to bring back up to wherever I'm from, and every time I go past a rubbish tip, I see flies. So I go to my king and I say, hey, all these flies create these huge mounds of rubbish on the earth. Okay? So correlation is not necessarily causation. So what if when we're looking at wounds and bacteria and these things that make us sick, and we see germs and we see viruses and we see bugs, what if they're actually not causing it, but they're present at the time? Okay? Correlation does not necessarily mean causation. Okay, it's possibly a fallacy. Okay, so I'm going to just open that up a little bit more. Anybody heard of a fellow called what is his name? Ralph Raymond Rife? Another interesting name to pop down.
Wilhelm Reich.
No, that's a different fella. Wilhelm Reich is somebody else. Royal Raymond Rife, R-I-F-E. Okay. Yep, absolutely, absolutely. So this guy was quite a brilliant guy. If you try looking him up under normal circumstances, you'll find this guy he's discredited. He's this quack. He's this lunatic. But at the time, he was a friend with a family called the Astors, who were a massively rich family. They loved him, so they gave him whatever he wanted. He could click his fingers and get what he wanted. He had one of the biggest laboratories in New York at the time. I think it was in New York. And he would put together these schematics for his own microscopes. Okay, you can't find any of this at the moment. Now, I don't know if you know about modern microscopy. What happens is we stop things, we stain them, we squish them, we put them in slides, and then we make our opinions based on them. Rife was able to refine his microscope so he could see stuff that was moving. Okay, so he's looking at live stuff. We're still looking at dead stuff. This guy was doing this in around the 1920s. Okay, and what he found was when he got cells, he identified this thing called pleomorphism. Have you heard of that? And it looks like you have these cells, especially red blood cells, you can see it clearly, where they float around under these living microscopes, and they start to grow these tiny little things that look like hairs out of them, okay? And then these hairs evolve into these little things that look a lot like viruses. And then these viruses morph into bacteria, and then that can morph into funguses, depending. So his hypothesis, and this is the hypothesis of terrain theory, is that at all times our bodies are trying to clear out rubbish, okay? And they're clearing out dead cells, sick tissue, and what we're seeing is the bacteria which are bringing that stuff out of our bodies. And it's not the fact that it's causing it. Now, I'm not too sure, but I'm leaning about 80% towards this now. And I'm kind of 80-20 now on this, and I was trained traditionally in germ theory. I think we've been lied to, okay? When we try to look up terrain theory, the first load of stuff we get in Google is it's just crunched, it's crushed, it's rubbish, you're a lunatic. How can you believe that? So we got to think, how come that's not on the table for debate? Okay, it should be on the table for debate. We've got very clever people talking about this, and they're regarded as quacks. I'm not sure why that is. If you want to know a little bit more, there's a guy called Dr. Thomas Cowan, who talks about terrain theory. And he's absolutely brilliant if you look at some of his stuff. Very compelling. Another fellow called, what's his name? Kaufman. Yep, Kaufman does some great work on that as well. Okay? And it's funny, but nobody will debate these guys in public. None of your professors will. We can even look at the whole HIV versus AIDS thing. A lot of compelling evidence that we've been scammed with that one. So nobody's denying the existence of this syndrome called AIDS. Nobody's denying that. But whether this little virus called HIV, whether that's the cause of it, that's a big question. Anybody heard of Koch's postulates? Robert Koch? Okay? Very simply put, he had these postulates are just ideas or I guess rules. Okay? He had these ideas that if we found an illness and if we thought it was contagion, what we should be able to do would be take it out of one person, isolate it, put it into somebody else, and if the other person had the same symptoms, then we could probably say that that thing that he isolated caused that illness. Okay? That's not happening. The isolate for viruses with COVID is mixed up with all sorts of things in the tens and tens and tens, if not the hundreds. And we're being told that this ambiguous piece of RNA is the cause of this thing we consider COVID. Again, we got to have question marks on absolutely everything. Okay? And I personally think we're getting lied to. Okay? So let's now, I mean, another good example, who's seen that Pfizer document that came out? That they had, yep, yeah, 9 bloody pages of side effects. Suppose, sorry? No, well, 9 pages of just the side effects themselves. Okay, yeah, I saw maybe a...
The first bit you get is 9,
yeah.
and if you get into it, there's 36
Yep.
pages of single-spaced
Yep. Incredible, isn't it? You know, in the middle of that document, they say it's a 3% mortality for vaccines. 3%. COVID mortality is less than 1. So yeah, we got some stuff that's not really good here. Who's heard of Peter Breggin? Dr. Peter Breggin. Great guy to look at. Okay, this guy is in his late 80s now. I think he might be actually touching 90, and he just about single-handedly destroyed this thing called psychoneurosurgery, lobotomies. Okay, so we know that the medical paradigm, the medical industry has been doing stuff to us for a long, long time that's not beneficial. There was one doctor in about the 60s, and he was doing something like 100, 200 lobotomies a day. They wheeled people in front of him. It would take him 5 minutes. He'd stick a needle through their orbital cavity into their brain, wiggle it around, and wheel them back out. This is real. This is our medical industry. This guy was famous. He was a world leader. Okay? Bregan inadvertently became one of the fighters and the people against that, because he just started getting contacted by these families, because I think he might have done a paper on it when he was fresh out of medical school. These guys nearly destroyed him. He tells this great story of where he ended up in England to debate one of these guys doing these procedures with the BBC, and he wasn't allowed any materials in. Okay, he had to debate this guy one-on-one, but he snuck this guy's book under his shirt. He had all these pages marked with all this information in it, and the conversation kind of developed, and this guy's sitting on his chair all piously talking about how brilliant he was, and Bregan was able to say, hang on, I don't think that's correct. I don't think you said that. In your book it says blah, blah, blah. And this guy's going, no, I didn't say that. Bregan pulls out this book, flips the page, said, well, actually, yes, you did. Here it is. And he destroyed this guy. This guy walked off. Bregan was told in no uncertain terms by the BBC never to come back to the BBC studios again. But he actually got a call a few months later by the producers saying it was the highest rated show they ever had. And just as a result of that, he destroyed the whole thing about doing lobotomies of people. Okay? He's done a lot more than that. He also started looking into, he was commissioned or hired in relation to mass school shootings. So these families were basically saying that all these school shooters in America, they were all on some sort of psychoactive medication prescribed by doctors. And he won loads of class actions against these companies because these medications do not work. They don't work. Okay? They're being thrown around to kids, and they are horrendous. Okay? Let's talk about some of our agencies that we have. The CDC, Center for Disease Control. They're meant to be impartial. Do we know they buy and sell vaccines? They have a budget to buy vaccines, and then they on-sell them. Yes, they do, absolutely. So how can we have impartiality? These guys are a company, a sales company. So we don't have impartiality. What about the CDC? Anybody heard of a guy called Bill Thompson? It's a whistleblower. He did some research back in 2004 about the link between autism and vaccines. Okay? His conscience got the better of him. 10 years later, this guy finally came out and he said, listen, I got to tell you about this. We had countless loads of documents establishing a firm link between autisms and vaccines, and we destroyed them. We burned them. We made up the numbers. We made up the records. Okay, the guy nearly went to jail. The woman at the time, Margaret or Anne, I can't remember her name, the woman at the time who was head of the CDC, she was on some massive salary, $1.5, $2 million a year. She tried to get him put in prison. When she left her job, she got an absolutely plum spot in the American government. The American government. Yep. And then she went back to the CDC again afterwards as an advisor. This is what these guys do. Not sure. Yeah, I mean, we're going to get to that. We're going to get that in a second. The World Health Organization. Incredible. These are the guys advising us. They were in bed with the tobacco industry in the 70s. If anybody wants to know a bit more about that, look at a documentary called Trust Who by Lillian Frank is the woman who put that out. You'll find it on BitChute. I don't think it's available otherwise. Okay. So I think it's fair to say that these guys don't want us well. They want to keep us sick. The whole medical industry is based on profits and it's based on shares. Okay? And they're out of business. Two of the biggest industries in the medical industry are cancer treatment and cancer research. Okay? This keeps people in jobs. Imagine if we found a cure for cancer. I wonder, are there cures for cancers? Yeah. Sorry?
If you don't get sick in the first place.
Yep. Yep. We seem to perpetuate stuff. There's a fair bit of evidence, and I'm firmly sitting in this corner, about tumours. A tumour encapsulates toxicity. What do doctors do? They chuck a needle in it, break it open, and we had a thing called metastases. Radiologists, they protect themselves with lead from radiation because it might cause cancer. So how the hell can radiation therapy be a treatment for cancer? How does that work? Doesn't take a genius to think about some of this logic, okay? Let's talk about a few other things. This is a thing that one of my mates down there likes, boron. Have a look at something called the Boron conspiracy. Anybody seen that? Yep, arthritis. A fellow called Rex Newman, I think back in about the 60s, had absolutely horrendous arthritis. He couldn't cure it. And he started researching. It's an absolutely fantastic paper. This guy was a clever guy. And when you look at this stuff, it's all discredited. It's this great paper with how boron works, where it goes, how it mixes, how it affects calcium, how it brings calcium into your cells. He cures his arthritis within weeks. Within weeks. Then his friends started asking him how he did it. And he said, here, this is what you do. And they said, could you make it for us? So he got a pill press and started making pills of boron for his friends. Word of mouth traveled so fast that these guys were getting better from arthritis, which is incurable, that he couldn't keep up with demand. So guess what he did? He called a pharmaceutical company to help him. Guess how quickly that lasted? Didn't last long. This guy was curing people. Quite incredible. Vitamin D. Endless studies of vitamin D. And what are we told to do? Wear sun cream. Don't go in the sun. Wear sunglasses. The sun is evil. You know, sunglasses, we got light receptors around our eyes. This is how we facilitate our skin not to get burned. Because the sun hits the skin around our eyes. Okay? I think to date, and I've been roughly keeping count, but I'd say something like 500 different types of sun cream have been pulled because of carcinogenic components. About 250 in the USA about a year ago, about another 20 or 30 back in Europe, 20 or so in Australia recently. Okay, so the sun causes skin cancer. It's related to skin cancer. Is the sun possibly just facilitating our bodies to detox? Again, correlation, causation. The fact that we end up with these things in our skin because we're in the sun, is that maybe the sun telling our bodies that we need to heal and our body drawing out toxicity? Okay, be careful what we listen to. Who knows how vitamin D works? The sun hits our skin has cholesterol in it. Cholesterol is one of the most important things you can have in your body. There is no such thing as bad cholesterol. By the way, I'll just preempt everything from now by saying that this is educational only. I've got to say that because I could get into trouble. I could go to prison if I don't say this. There is no medical advice here. I can't even mention the word cure here because it's illegal. The MHRA in England made the word cure illegal somewhere in about the 1940s from memory. Okay? It's illegal for me to suggest curing. Okay? So the way I'm using the word cure is with a K. It's K-U-R-E, by the way, just for anybody here. Okay? So yeah, back to cholesterol. So the sun hits the cholesterol in our skins. Cholesterol carries vitamin D. This is why vitamin D is called a hormone as well as everything else. As a vitamin, okay? And this is responsible for just about every single process in our body. Nearly every single neurotransmitter depends on vitamin D. And I heard fairly recently that there are moves afoot to make vitamin D illegal in Australia.
That's okay, because we get it from the sun.
Yeah.
That's the best form.
Absolutely, absolutely, you're exactly right. The sun is by far the best, but the motive to make it illegal, this is what we got to question.
But then they start trying to cover the sun and shade the sun.
Yeah.
Pills is you're getting only one form of
Correct.
different versions of vitamin D.
Somebody just said the problem with the pills is you only get one form, but that's exactly right. By far, the best source is the sun. Absolutely, by far. Okay, vitamin B17, who's heard of that? Okay, we got some clever people here. Excellent. It's in apricot seeds. It's illegal in Australia. If you want to look at the work of Dr. John Richardson with that, and a nurse that he was with, Pat Griffin, they got paper after paper of this thing curing cancer. Okay? There's more. GCMAF, who's ever heard of that? Yeah. Okay. I can't remember the acronym for the first part of it. GCMAF. The G stands for a sugar. I can't remember what that is right now off the top of my head, but the MAF is macrophage activating factor, I think, from memory. Okay, it's like these little Pac-Men. It's our bodies normally produce this stuff, and it runs around and eats up defective cells. These guys, I think, were in about the 60s, found a way to produce this stuff, and a guy called David Noakes started bringing this to prominence in the mid 90s to the early 2000s. Okay, he's only just got out of a prison in France. So he just got out of prison in France. I think that his partner, a woman called Lynn Thayer, has died since. And she ended up in a French prison for about 2 or 3 years. Okay? He was working very closely with a fellow called Jeff Bradstreet. And this guy, Bradstreet, you look him up in the internet and you'll find he's the biggest cook, he's a quack, he did this, he did this. This guy's had evidence of over, I think, 11,000 clients getting him better from all sorts of things. He used to bring mute autistic kids to speaking school level with GCMAF, among some other things. Okay, his offices, I think, what year was this? In 2015, his offices were raided with stun guns and grenades and guns and whatnot. So he was obviously so upset because he was curing people that he jumped off a bridge and killed himself before he shot himself in the chest. Yeah, suicide. Okay, look at something like 60 different alternative practitioners, query, murdered. Okay, Carrie Mullis. Yeah, just before all this COVID stuff, who said PCR tests should never be used diagnostically. Okay, be interesting to have his comments now. Convenient he's not here, hey? Would the medical industry possibly kill people to protect their profits? It's not rocket science. Not rocket science. I think you'd have to be naive to think that this doesn't go on.
What about that whistleblower who has the website learnthe.risk.org?
Learn the risk. Remind me of that one.
She was
Oh, yeah.
the whole history of
Yep.
vaccination
Yep.
having no correlation with the history of the decline in disease whatsoever.
She posted just before her death, "I am not suicidal."
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the name's on the tip of my tongue. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
She was taken out
Yeah.
just before all this
I think so.
hoo-ha as well.
I think so. Cannabis. We've only got two different receptors for two different plants in our bodies. We've got nicotinic receptors and we've got cannabinoid receptors. They're the only two receptors we have in our bodies that correlate with plants. Stacks of research that this has been with us throughout history. We look at the war on drugs. What an incredible thing to say, the war on drugs. When you had was it the Purdue family with OxyContin? Look at the death rate for OxyContin in America in the last 5 years, last 10 years, excuse me. Okay, I think the deaths from OxyContin, this is a prescribed drug, an opiate prescribed by doctors, surpassed, just OxyContin, all other causes of illicit drug death in America about a year ago. Every single other one, your cocaines, your methamphetamines, you name it, by far. And this is a legal drug. These guys don't want us well. They don't want us well. Vitamin C. If you want to know some of that work, look at a fellow called Linus Pauling. Incredible work. This guy's considered some weird crackpot. If you do a quick YouTube search, there's a current affairs show, a New Zealand one. From memory, it's about 10 years old or so. And just do some search around police constable, end-stage cancer, vitamin C. Okay, incredible story. This guy, end-stage cancer, is getting interviewed on mainstream television channel, and given something like 2 or 3 weeks to live, been through all the therapy. His daughter went to school, and she was so upset. She was telling one of her friends about it, and her friend said, "My dad happens to know about vitamin C. You should tell your dad about it." So, and he had a friend of his who was a doctor in some university. This doctor started looking into it. They put him in hospital. They put him on IV vitamin C, high dose. His cancer fully reversed. In the interview, there was a professor from I think Christchurch University, who's going, "We need to study this." This is real. We need to study this. That's 10 years ago. Absolutely nothing. Okay? So vitamin C works. If you're going to use vitamin C, consider liposomal vitamin C, by the way, because we excrete it through our kidneys quite quickly. Any other sorts of it goes under your tongue. Clean water. How much have they spent on tests, on just aprons? They want to vaccinate the whole friggin' world, and yet they can't just whip into a little village in Africa somewhere and clean up the water. And we know clean water makes people live. Okay, they stand back. We've got child trafficking, we got sex slavery, we got all sorts of horrible things happening, but they're worried about us getting a cold. Things are not adding up. Things don't add up. You know, we talk about this whole thing about the virus now. The virus. We're just getting sold this, and we talk about COVID. Okay, so it's one of the fellow John Rappaport does some great work on this. There's some great work. So he talks about how we have just this one entity, and then we have this one magic bullet. So it's really important that there is a COVID. And when people try to argue against that, we kind of get taken down. So I'm not saying people are not dying. Okay, not saying that. There's something out there. There's stuff out there, but there always has been. I was working in intensive care up here about 20 years ago. We had a moniker for something that we called a Tully fever. Okay, and it was because the doctors didn't know what was wrong with these guys. They'd end up on ventilators in acute sepsis, and they would die, and we would find nothing in their bloodstream. So the doctors called it Tully fever. It was a flu. 20 years ago, I was turning off ventilators on the flu. Nothing's changed. Actually, one thing has changed. Now we're advertising it. Okay? We also have kind of a stable death rate. That's in spite of us killing, murdering scores and scores and scores of old people in every country with outrageous, what would it be? Instructions on how to treat these guys on insane ventilator settings that were bound to kill them, on horrendous medications that don't work. Then we can look at things called ivermectin. That's cheap. It's off patent. Maybe it works. Hydroxychloroquine. Okay. So maybe things are getting hidden from us.
Can I just...
Yeah, sure.
I've just finished watching, some of you might watch The High Wire, but
Yep. Love the high wire.
the last one with Dr. Tess Lowry, who was talking about ivermectin, and Dr. Andrew Hill from the Liverpool University. Today they put out the little movie that Oracle Films made.
Yeah.
And it's insane. It's, yeah.
So just to, because I'll
It links back, well, there were several, Dr. Tess Lowry.
yeah, just for continuation, because I'll be posting this on my channel. No, that's all good. We'll have questions later. But one of the ladies here was just talking about Dr. Tess Lowry, and was it Richard Hill?
Not Richard's.
It's Hill. What his last name? Andrew Hill. Sorry.
He's the one.
Yeah, who basically is presented with this irrefutable evidence that this thing works, and this guy, she caught her conversation on a Zoom call, and this conversation is one of the most outrageous things you will ever hear. This guy is meant to be responsible for information going back to the government to try and get people over this thing we're calling COVID, and this guy is blatantly just blocking. I love that. She said to him in one part of this little conversation, "I do not know how you sleep at night," and you know.
It's fairly obvious in the end.
Yep,
why
these guys are colluding.
Unitrade was funding.
Yep,
him.
that's right.
Unitrade has main sponsors.
Bill and Melinda Gates, absolutely. So then we can take things back to some of the chats we did before, which are the power of the nocebo effect and the placebo effect, and this idea that we're getting bombarded with about a psychosomatic effect that we're having happen on society. Okay, so if we are getting bombarded time and time again that there is this dangerous evil bug out there that's going to destroy us and kill us all, this does sit in our consciousness. We've already mentioned this guy Sheldrake. He talks about this thing called morphic resonance. If we have enough people believing these lies and these myths, it makes them true. Okay, it makes things manifest, it makes things come into being. So we have to be very careful about what we're listening to and who we're getting our information from. Okay. We've got these. Another thing that just is quite mind-blowing is the difference between absolute statistics and statistical. Absolute statistics. Anybody know much about that?
Well, yeah, a little bit. using all of your
yeah.
information,
So
or if you're just doing relative statistics there.
Yeah.
I won't talk about
yeah. So again, I am recording and nobody can hear you back there. So that's okay. We'll check. We'll take questions and stuff later. But yeah, absolute and relatives. It's quite incredible. So to explain what this lady was saying just before, if I have 10,000, well, let's make it a bit bigger for quantification. But if I had 100,000 people in two different groups, okay, and if I have, let's say, one group is here, a placebo group, 100,000, and another group is here, the non-control group of 100,000 people, and 10% of that group, if I want to use information, and let's say they did something recently with the Pfizer 97% effectiveness. This is roughly what they did. It was quite horrendous. Okay, so I think the whole group was something like 320,000 people, just from memory. And out of that group, they picked, I think it was in one group something like 300 people, and in the other group maybe 120 or 130, something like this. So out of the 300,000 people, they looked at only 300 people. Okay, and then they compared the differences between one of those groups of 120, let's say, and the other group of 120. Okay, and there was a difference of those groups, maybe of 10 people in one group and 1 in the other. That 10 versus 1, statistically, is 97%, 90-ish%. But out of that whole group, you've got something like 0.001 of a statistic, of a value. Okay, so these guys are lying to us with statistics. We have to.
The exact same one to push the 97% of scientists agree with climate change.
Yes, yeah. Well, that was even more. Yeah, there was even more behind that, which is yeah, absolutely. But yeah, they lie to us with statistics. Okay, so we have to absolutely question everything we're told. Okay, we have to have this idea that the experts are getting paid, they're getting funded. Okay, anybody interested in fallacies at all? Logical fallacies? Okay, so if I say something about virology, the first thing that's said about that is I'm not an expert. Okay, that's what's called an ad hominem attack. I don't have to be an expert to look at facts. Okay, but then on the other hand, you've also got another fallacy, which is the appeal to authority fallacy. So just because this person is a scientist and an expert, could they be right? Yeah. Could they have more knowledge than me? Yeah, they could. But could they have ulterior motives because they're getting paid to deliver an opinion? Absolutely. So we got to be careful about these ad hominem attacks, and we work with our facts. Okay? And appeals to authorities as well. So we'll kind of round it off. So essentially, we can keep things, as complex as things are, we can keep things simple. We can keep things simple. And essentially, if we are exposing ourselves to stress and toxicity, we are going to be unwell. Okay? And when I say stress, I'm not necessarily talking about psychological stress. That is one form of stress. But you also have physical stress, and then you also have chemical stress. So if there's something wrong with you, you have to address all three parts of this stress. The psychological stress can be relationships or problems, but it's also the stuff that we're taking in. The stuff we're taking in, it's the stuff we're being exposed to. And we have to be careful, we have to look at that. That stuff makes us sick. There's an area of science which, again, I'd encourage people to look at called German New Medicine. Okay? And this essentially states, it breaks open the cause and effect thing we think about medicine. So the cause and effect thing might be, you've gotten exposed to this particular thing here, your illness is by necessity going to be Y. German medicine says that that's not the case. It says that depending on how we're made up, we express our illnesses differently. Okay? I can't remember the doctor who was pioneering with this, but I believe it was in about the 1970s. And he looked at...
Dr. Reichhammer.
Yep, fantastic. So he looked at...
The French put him in jail for 4 years.
There you go.
Spanish the same.
Yep.
Germany.
So this guy was looking at CT scans, and he found these same parts of the brain were consistent with different forms of illness. And then he was able to relate that through historical data about trauma that these guys had had in their past. So when you hear about, this little particle might give you this disease or that might give you that, not necessarily so. There's more to it than that. But again, we can still keep it back to the basics. We can detoxify our lives, cut foods, drink good water, eat clean food, be aware of things like pesticides and herbicides, get out in the sun, move our bodies, maybe put more of an idea behind some alternative therapies, because we know that all these things that are getting bastardized and criticized, maybe there's more to them. Okay, so yep, that's all I got. Spread the truth, people. Any questions?
Yeah, what were you saying about autism? What was the thing that was healing kids of autism, please?
So it seems to be, there's a fellow you should look at. Again, all these guys are called quacks. Look at a fellow called Rashid Buttar. It seems there's a very strong link between heavy metals and autism. But the thing that Broad Street was using was a thing called GCMAF.
CTMAS.
G for Gary.
Where do you get that?
I think it's illegal just about everywhere. But there's actually clinics. I think
assumed that.
I think there's clinics in Southeast Asia that are using it, and there might be some around Europe as well. And you were meant to be able to make it yourself from colostrum in clean milk. A little bit iffy on the data behind that or the effectiveness of that.
Thank you.
That's okay.
And yeah, you're blowing the whistle. How come nobody shot you in the back?
Well, I left the medical industry, so and I'm kind of small time. But if I get much bigger, if this crowd gets much bigger, maybe I gotta look over my shoulder.
So thank you for blowing the whistle.
Yeah, no worries.
But what is astounding is some of these guys have done research. Like there was a book written by Dr. John Ott,
Yep.
double T.
Yep.
What he did on sunlight, and it was just amazing. And then exactly how that the Cowan guy.
Yep.
What's his name?
Tom
Thomas
Cowan.
He showed you that if you put this cell inside a lead box, it stops functioning.
Mm.
You put it near a phone and it stops functioning. However, if you put it on the earth, you put your hands on it, put it in the sun, the cell rejuvenates and keeps moving.
If you look at it, there's a movie called that. I think it's That Earthing Movie or The Earthing Movie.
Oh,
Quite
yes,
incredible.
Yes.
All these things are discredited. But yeah, you're right. Absolutely. There's another guy if you want to know more about light, and this guy blows me out the water. I can't keep up with him, but if I can only understand about 10% of what he says. He's a guy called Jack Cruz. I think Cruz is spelled with a K. He's a doctor. He's quite incredible guy. Sorry? He's very quirky. Yeah. Again, as I was saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because some of these guys are quirky, doesn't mean to say their information is not legitimate. But he cites some great past research about why he's come to his conclusions. Any other questions? Yep.
The sun hitting the skin, and I just missed the last
Yep.
part there.
So
Sun hits cholesterol, skin.
So it's quite funny, but one of the first people to identify that, I think there was this American doctor back in about the 80s, and she actually was saying that we had light receptors behind our knees in our skin. And this woman got absolutely ridiculed, criticized, mauled by the industry. And it's only in the mid 2000s now we're finding out that absolutely we have photogenic receptors all throughout our bodies in our skin. Okay, but we have more of them around our eyes. Okay, and when we're wearing sunglasses all the time, we are stopping the sun from hitting this area around our eyes, which is one of the most sensitive to regulate our body about what it wants to do with the sun. So if your skin is not regulating itself properly, you get burned easier. So one of the best ways to build up resistance for sunburn is to go out in the sun in midday and then dusk. And your body starts to work in with something called your circadian rhythms. There's a whole area of science called circadian medicine, which is based itself on this. And you regulate yourself to how the sun is working, okay? That's one thing. Then the separate part of it is cholesterol and the importance of cholesterol, which is where your vitamin D comes from. So this is why vitamin D is called a hormone. All a hormone means is it's something that your body produces itself, that's all. Okay? Cholesterol is in high levels in our skin, and cholesterol holds vitamin D. So this is where we get our vitamin D from in our bodies. Then the sun hits it, it breaks down the cholesterol in our skins and releases vitamin D into our bodies. This is the process.
Apparently your brain needs cholesterol to
Your brain is made of cholesterol. I think something like 70% of the solid matter of your brain is made of cholesterol. Okay?
Why is people, there's so many Alzheimer's patients
Yep.
around on statins.
Well, yep. So big, great thing. So huge, two or three studies now to date that I can remember. I'm not prepared for exactly for them, but 2 or 3 studies show that when you're on statins, okay, they lower your cholesterol, but when they've looked at things longitudinally, the time at which you die is not increased in any way, shape, or form. It shows that you die from I think things like plaques in your brain and stuff like this. Okay, so we got this myth that we're all low in calcium. By the way, we're not. We're not low in calcium. What we're missing is the little guy with the pulse that directs the calcium where to go. We're getting enough calcium, but it's not going in the right places. If we were low in calcium, we wouldn't be getting heart plaques. Heart plaques are made of calcium. We have plaques in our brain, they're made of calcium. So we got this just specific cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect. Everything is a dance together. And unless we're putting all the people involved in a dance together, we're going to mess up. Okay? So you got a thing called vitamin K2. One of the best sources. This is why people drink kombucha. This is one of the little directors to tell our calcium where to go. Okay? We're all low. Our food is absolutely horrendous. We're not getting these things that we used to get 100 years ago. Okay? So people say, oh, well, I'm going to take magnesium then. Well, don't take magnesium unless you're going to take this and clean up this and take this out and put this in and get your sun. And everything's a dance. We've got to look at everything together. But yeah, good question. Yeah, but incidentally, the whole cholesterol myth was put out by the sugar industry to poison us. That was back in the 1970s. There was an article in the paper about 5 years ago, tiny little box saying numerous files found to show that the sugar industry paid millions of dollars, this is back in the 70s, to give fraudulent information about cholesterol. There was one doctor talking about it at the time, his name escapes me right now, but he ended up, I think, committing suicide because he was absolutely ridiculed throughout the world. And everything, another person I look at again, I can't think who this guy said, but was that in this little book this guy wrote, something like the white cocaine or something like that, I can't remember, but was so prophetic. This book was a prophecy from the 70s about what was going to happen in the 2000s. Everything in this book played out. This guy killed himself. This is the power that these guys have to ridicule people who are trying to deliver truth.
And it's the same with the coconut oil.
Coconut oil can just, yep,
One doctor,
yep.
yeah.
Had a hand up back there, yeah.
What was boron good for again?
So boron is in everything. It should be in our soils. Okay, so because we have monofarming, we're missing stacks of really important vitamins and chemicals and and minerals and all sorts of things from our soils. One of them is boron. All plants should have boron. Most of them don't now because of our farming methods. Okay, what boron does, boron has a little dance with, I'm fairly sure, magnesium. Okay, and what it does is it's got phenomenal anti-inflammatory effects. It's also superbly alkalinic, and we know our bodies like alkaline environments. So essentially, chronic disease finds it very hard to exist with boron, especially arthritic things.
They actually did studies all around Australia.
Yep.
It might have been the 70s, I think, and the communities that had natural high levels of boron in the soil had the lesser amount of arthritis
Yep.
in the community.
Yep. This is well established, and yet boron is illegal. Actually, it's in your shopping, detergent aisle in your laundry with poison on it. Yeah, and again, I'm just speaking about me. I'm not speaking about anybody else. You guys do whatever the hell you want, but I buy that boron and I put a little bit of that in my water. Okay? Yeah.
Is the boron is same as boric acid or bromide?
Bromide is different, but yeah. What?
Thank you, because lately I had in my mind first time I hear, but it's gorgeous this conversation.
Yeah, but boron is.
My problem and you answer for it. So the bromine is different than the boron,
Bromide is different to boron, correct? Yeah.
and boron and bromic acid is the same color, same.
Fairly different from memory, and I'd be really stretching back there to pull out that information for you right now.
All right.
Yeah.
And this is my question.
Yeah.
Lately, and I'm glad you're here because, and And one of my other question would be, if you are vegan 15 years, and of course you don't eat any animal or animal product, and if your cholesterol in a cold, right range, like probably never go down 4.6 and never go up whatever 5 or 6, do you maintain enough cholesterol for vitamin D absorption?
So that question is almost like the question was about maintaining your cholesterol if you were vegan and what range what range you should maintain it in relation to vitamin D. But it's a little bit like a piece of string. So at any given time, so a nice analogy is with animals. Whoever has had their animal's blood pressure tested by a vet? Anybody? What vet has ever said, hey, what's your dog's blood pressure doing? They never do it, because we got this thing where our bodies are always regulating at every given time, and cholesterol is the same. If we have stress, we need cholesterol to repair stuff. So this is why we have high cholesterol. And if we don't have stress, we have cholesterol within normal ranges. So your question is a little bit about improving, I guess, cholesterol levels to be able to get better vitamin D.
High density. Mine, I just want to increase the good ones.
So again, bear in mind, if your cholesterol is high or higher, that means that you're stressed.
Yeah.
That means you're stressed.
High,
That means you're stressed.
I just want
Yeah.
to make sure enough. My cholesterol, is it enough if I'm vegan for by here as I was 3 decades? Yes.
Yeah. So for yourself, it's a little bit different. So again, we always have this kind of, I guess, play off between people who are against animal products and people who are with animal products, okay? And I'm more in the animal product side, okay? But there are some people who are vegan and vegetarian who thrive, they do very well. There seems to be a lot of people that don't though, okay? So we got to keep it simple again. If it's working for you, keep doing it. If you're feeling healthy, keep doing it. You're doing something right. But if you're feeling unwell, you've got to start looking at something, because there's something missing. And I know there's lots and lots of examples of people who are very stringently vegan or vegetarian for many, many years, who became very sick, who went on doing things like full carnivore diets, who healed all their illnesses. So, and I'm not saying to do that or not to do that, but I'm saying the more we know about this stuff, the better. So we have to do things that just seem to be working for us more. So the pushing your cholesterol up, well, you got to be careful about that idea or that way of thinking, because if our cholesterol's up, it could mean we're sick because we have a stress. So we have to just bring it back to how we're feeling. If we're feeling well.
Cholesterol, I just questioned it related to white bread, nano meal per liter, I see.
So let's talk about. I mean, that's a great question about what our levels should be. It all depends on how good the lab equipment is. A different lab will give you a different result. It's not specific. It depends on how things are calibrated. Were they calibrated well? How old is the machine? How sensitive is it? So these measures that we look at, there's ambiguity even about that.
Yeah. They put it too low, the level.
Yeah. One of the
Outside of the cell, our liquid should be alkaline.
One of the best ways to regulate acid and base in our bodies is, anybody guess? Easiest way?
Vegetable, no animal product, all animal is specific.
Easiest way. We can do it right now.
Breathe
Uh-huh.
properly.
Breathing.
Oxygen.
Carbon dioxide and water make carbonic acid. Okay? So carbon dioxide in our blood does the same. The more carbon dioxide in our blood, our acid levels go up. And do you know? And how yeah, that masks, absolutely. And how do we get rid of carbon dioxide? We can breathe faster. We can do active breathing. Pick anyone you like. Wim Hof method, fantastic. Fantastic. Okay? Box breathing. This is one of the best ways to control our pH levels. Anybody else?
So this is fantastic for the breathing.
Will not take up boron.
Yep. There you go. There's a man sitting over here in the corner who's an expert in all that, and he tells a great story of bringing trees back to life, and he couldn't work out how to do it. And the secret ingredient he stumbled on a few decades ago was boron. Yep. And again, if your plants and your food that you're eating have boron, then you also get it. But most of our foods are deficient. This is why we need to go organic. Anybody else? Yep, sorry.
Can I just ask, is the boron you buy borax?
Yep, same thing. Yes.
So the one in the supermarket, is that food grade?
I don't know if you can get it in a health food shop. Yeah. Okay. I've seen the supplements, yeah. But if you look at them,
However,
yeah.
a little bottle or a little thing container of borax from Woolies will last you well over a year.
Ah, there you go.
You pay about $4 for it.
So
Can you sprinkle it in the garden to improve your garden?
so then so
Sort of go just a
Yeah,
little
I
bit.
just like.
Healthy Hub has food grade boron. Neville just tells me.
Oh, who does?
Healthy Hub.
Oh, excellent.
I find the supplements, they're way overpriced, and you don't get your bang for your buck. Whereas if you get in the boron, yep, absolutely. Our skins are incredibly absorbent. Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Foot baths. Absolutely. Anybody else? Okay, we'll call it that, guys. Thank you very much for your attention.